All right, so days after longtime Democrat himself, Donald Trump, I feel like sometimes we forget about that, was endorsed by longtime Democrat Robert F. Kennedy Jr., former Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard offered a full-throated endorsement of Donald Trump yesterday in Michigan, and she specifically mentioned her partisan evolution, just like Bobby Kennedy did in his own endorsement of Trump. Let's take a listen quickly to what she had to say in Michigan yesterday.
This administration has us facing multiple wars on multiple fronts and regions around the world, and closer to the brink of nuclear war than we ever have been before. This is one of the main reasons why I'm committed to doing all that I can to send President Trump back to the White House, where he can once again serve us as our commander-in-chief.
The Daily Beast, Flo, called this Tulsi Gabbard's MAGA makeover. This was a speech at the National Guard Association in Detroit. Trump spoke there as well. She said, "I'm committed to doing all I can to send President Trump back to the White House." She talked a little bit about foreign policy, basically lauding him for not starting any new wars, for being the first president in a long time to not start any new wars. What's your reaction to this? Because one of the things when, Daily Beast describes this as a mega makeover that I think of is Tulsi Gabbard has sort of had an evolution. She talked about that herself, but she's also always been a fairly free-thinking member of Congress. People were kind of perplexed by the different votes she would take. Feels like this is part of a pattern for Trump. He's rolling out a bunch of former Democrats who support him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure the word makeover really covers it exactly. That suggests that she's disappeared into some back room wearing a Black Lives Matter kente cloth and come back out with a MAGA red cap on. I don't quite think that captures exactly what's happened here. It seems like a long-term evolution for Gabbard, one that lines up with RFK's own evolution from somebody who was extremely critical of the Democrats from kind of within their sphere to someone increasingly ousted to the point where they become a kind of apostate. And at a point at which their only hope probably for a continuing political life is to side with Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I will say, I mean, it is somewhat remarkable because this woman was the former vice chair, I should say, of the Democratic National Committee. So last week's DNC, there was a time when Tulsi Gabbard had a huge role at DNC. She was literally the vice chair. And I believe...
Yeah, and endorsed Bernie Sanders, of course, as well. To have that move from someone endorsing Bernie Sanders to endorsing Donald Trump is probably the most striking of all of the various conversions that we've seen over the last few years from a Democrat side to a Republican side.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think RFK Jr. himself actually endorsed Hillary Clinton back in 2007. I want to say he endorsed her in 2016. I'm not positive on that, but I believe he was an endorser of her in that 2008 campaign, which is fairly interesting too. He was on Tucker Carlson just in the last 24 hours explaining more about his political conversion. And one of the questions I have for you, Flo, we've seen this happen actually in the UK on particular issues. The left has responded. I'm thinking right now of like what's happened with the transgender issue in the UK. The left has responded by, in some ways, softening. We've seen, even here in the States, recent investigations by the New York Times and others that, could not have been published by those papers 5 years ago. And I guess I'm sort of wondering how you think the left is going to respond because to all of these defectors. Because what I'm seeing more and more is the left just doubling down. And then there are some issues where they'll kind of soften. But it's like the response is, well, Tulsi Gabbard was always an Assad stooge, traitor. Of course she belongs with Donald Trump. She's where she belongs. RFK Jr., where he belongs. He's always been a weirdo. I don't know. It doesn't seem like the best response to me.
The left is going to struggle here with the problem of particularly the militaristic narrative around Harris and Biden previously. That's what Trump is leaning on in this moment. It's no surprise that Gabbard chose a military event to announce this endorsement because in many ways her focus seems to be on foreign policy and militaristic interventionism and why actually Trump represents, in a kind of strange turn of events, a peacekeeper. It strikes me as an interesting moment for the left in the US where they're going to have to decide, is anti-interventionism and to a certain extent kind of almost anti-imperialism now becoming a right-wing talking point? It's very strange, again, like with women's rights in the UK and of course in the US as well, there's been this real tussle around how do you define this thing that previously used to be one of the prides of the left movement, that was something that was held up as the jewel jewel in the crown, civil rights, women's rights, then coming under scrutiny and becoming a kind of grey area that could be used in a horseshoe. So who knows? Many people say that there is no horseshoe, that it's not an agreement between far left and far right. It's actually just people who, like RFK and Tulsi, want power and want to establish themselves as political activists. And the only way to do that is to use the in of Donald Trump, who seems like a perhaps more malleable person or porous person who you could side with. But I guess there's this other question, which is, if you really think about the policy, then is it that the left in the US is going to have to start taking seriously how militaristic the last 15 years have been and just how many wars have started under the Democrats' ticket?
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good split screen with Kamala Harris' speech at the DNC on Thursday, where she was talking about how the American military is going to be the most lethal force in the world, and was very, at least she tried to sound very hawkish and perhaps a bid to I shouldn't say third-party voters, but independent voters, Democratic curious voters. So that is a great point, Flo. I also remember hearing Tulsi Gabbard say she would potentially have been open to serving as Donald Trump's vice president at an event that I saw her at back here in June. So in a sense, Trump is more, I guess, nakedly transactional, but he also does really like those tussles to happen within his own cabinet, within his own campaign, within his own team, where you have doves like Gabbard duking it out with hawks like John Bolton. So who knows what a second Trump term would potentially deliver.
And where the hell is JD Vance is the other thing I want to know. There has been more focus in the last few days on RFK and Gabbard as two endorsers of Trump than Vance at all. His visibility has gone to almost nothing. It feels that, in a way, what Trump is doing, instead of having the kind of waltz ticket on the Harris side, which is get this friendly guy who could be the face of the everyman who's going to vote for the Democrats, what Trump is doing is dispersing his support out across these quite polarizing figures and saying, well, look, no matter what sort of Republican voter you are, or perhaps you're not even a Republican voter or don't think of yourself as one, you can find someone who's endorsed me who looks a little bit like you. I think it's quite a shrewd move, actually.
That's super interesting. I'm just to think about that. That is really. If you like this video, make sure to subscribe to the Undercurrents channel and click that notification button as well. It helps us keep doing independent journalism. We appreciate it so much. Thank you for watching.